My mother-in-law kicked my parents out of my wedding because they didn't pay for it, and she regretted it instantly. It was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, the day I had dreamed about since I was a little girl, the day I would walk down the aisle in a white dress, marry my Prince Charming, and celebrate the start of a beautiful new chapter. The grand ballroom was stunning, with crystal chandeliers hanging above us and elaborate flower arrangements decorating every corner. Everything about the room screamed luxury and money, and as I stood there next to Daniel, my heart swelled with joy. This was it, the moment I had been waiting for. But as the ceremony unfolded, something felt wrong. I should have noticed it when I saw my mother-in-law Rosie sitting in the front row. While everyone else around her dabbed at their eyes or beamed with happiness, Rosie sat rigidly, her face a mask of cold disapproval. Her lips were pressed into a tight line, and her eyes barely seemed to acknowledge the beauty of the moment. When Daniel kissed me and the room erupted in cheers, she only offered a perfunctory golf clap, as though she were watching a mediocre performance at a county fair rather than a once-in-a-lifetime event. I had seen that expression on her face before, at our engagement announcement, when she had gone on a long tirade about some people being more interested in the family fortune than in true love. But I had hoped that today, of all days, she would put aside her bitterness and let us have our moment. The wedding dinner was supposed to be a celebration. The room was filled with laughter and clinking glasses as our guests enjoyed the delicious food and the festive atmosphere. But then, just as I thought we could finally relax, Rosie stood up. Her champagne flute was held high in one hand, and she wore her signature predator's smile, perfectly painted red lips curving in a way that seemed to promise trouble. "If I could have everyone's attention," Rosie said in a voice that was sickly sweet, but with an edge that made everyone fall silent. The room went quiet, and all eyes turned toward her. I could feel Daniel's hand tighten around mine in warning. "What's she doing?" he whispered, his voice full of tension. But Rosie was already in motion, her gaze sweeping across the room with the precision of a hawk. "I'd like to address something that's been bothering me all evening," Rosie continued, her voice laced with a strange kind of amusement. Daniel's grip on my hand tightened, his knuckles turning white. Everyone seemed to hold their breath, sensing that something was coming, and then it happened. Rosie's gaze landed on my parents, who were sitting at the back of the room. I could see my mother's face drain of color, and my father's hand froze mid-air, his fork still gripped tightly. I didn't understand what was happening at first. Why was she looking at them like that? What had they done to deserve her attention? "You know," Rosie said, her voice now dripping with condescension, "I find it absolutely fascinating that some people think they can just show up to a wedding they haven't contributed a single penny to." There was a sharp intake of breath from the crowd. I felt my chest tighten, my throat closing with the shock of it all. My father set down his fork with a clatter, his face a mixture of confusion and hurt. Rosie wasn't done. She took a delicate sip from her champagne flute, a smug smile playing on her lips. "I mean, really, when you think about it, isn't it only fair that those who pay for the wedding get to decide who stays?" She paused for a moment, letting the tension build. Then, in a tone that was as cold as ice, she added, "Since our family covered every expense while others couldn't manage to chip in anything at all. Well, I think it's time for certain guests to leave." I felt my heart drop into my stomach. The room fell silent, except for the sound of my breath catching in my throat. I could see my parents' faces, and I knew that this wasn't just an attack on them. It was an attack on everything that this day was supposed to represent. A day of love, family, and togetherness had suddenly turned into a battlefield. Tears threatened to spill from my eyes, but I was too stunned to move, too shocked to speak. Before I could find my voice, my father stood up. His movements were deliberate and calm, but his voice was firm as he straightened his suit jacket. The room watched in hushed silence as he addressed Rosie. "You know what?" he said, his tone resolute. "You're absolutely right, Rosie. We'll go." The words echoed in the silence of the room, and for a moment, everything seemed to freeze. My father wasn't raising his voice, wasn't arguing. He was simply making a statement of dignity, of respect, and of knowing when to walk away. I couldn't believe it. My parents, who had supported me through everything, were being asked to leave on my wedding day, and yet they were handling it with a grace I couldn't have imagined. My heart swelled with pride for them, but also with a deep sense of betrayal toward Rosie. "But first, if you'll allow me one small moment." Rosie waved her hand with an exaggerated flourish, as if she were granting some kind of royal permission. The room fell even quieter, if that was possible. "Oh, by all means, Jim, take your parting shot." It was almost surreal, watching my father, who had stood up with so much composure, still standing tall, his back straight and his chin raised. Across the room, I caught my mother's eye. She was sitting next to him, her face calm, despite the storm of emotions that had just swept through the room. Even in this moment, when everything seemed to be falling apart, she managed to give me a small smile. Her lips moved, silently mouthing the words she had repeated to me countless times when I was growing up. "Stand tall, baby girl." Those words were a lifeline now. They reminded me of who I was, of where I came from, and how strong my parents had always been. Despite Rosie's cruel and demeaning behavior, they were holding their ground, showing a kind of quiet dignity that made me proud to be their daughter. As I glanced around the room, I noticed several of Rosie's country club friends exchanging uncomfortable glances. These women, all dressed in expensive designer gowns, had witnessed countless outbursts from Rosie in the past. They had watched her reduce waiters to tears over a wrong wine pairing, or seen her accidentally spill red wine on a rival's white designer dress. But this was a new low. I felt a deep ache in my heart as I watched the scene unfold in front of me. It wasn't just my parents she was humiliating. It was me. It was my wedding day. And my mother-in-law had turned it into a public spectacle. To understand the weight of this moment, though, you need to know the history behind it. Rosie had made my life a living hell since the first time Daniel brought me home to meet his family. I still remember it clearly. That first meeting with Rosie. I had been nervous but hopeful, wanting to make a good impression on the woman who would be my future mother-in-law. As soon as she opened the door, though, her icy gaze swept over me, and she made her opinion clear without saying a word. Her first words to me, as she studied me from head to toe, were, "Oh, how quaint. A public school teacher? Daniel always did have a soft spot for charity cases. But marrying one?" I froze, not sure how to respond. I had heard about Rosie's reputation. She came from old money, the kind of family that had built cities and had their names etched into the foundations of skyscrapers. Meanwhile, my dad worked as a mechanic, fixing cars in his small shop, and my mom worked at the local school library, helping kids find their next favorite book. We were comfortable, but definitely not in the same tax bracket as Rosie's world. She made sure I knew it every chance she got. When Daniel proposed to me, it felt like a dream come true. But little did I know that Rosie would soon take over every detail of the wedding planning. From the venue to the color of the napkins, nothing was ever good enough for her. "Darling," she had said when I showed her my choices for the wedding decor, inspecting them like they were contaminated. "Let's leave this to someone with experience in elegant affairs." She even insisted on paying for everything, refusing to let my parents contribute in any way. "Oh, don't worry yourselves," she had cooed, her smile sweet but condescending. "It wouldn't make much difference anyway. I want a grand wedding for my son, not some cheap, average ceremony." The audacity of it all had been overwhelming. It wasn't just that she wanted to control every little detail. It was that she treated my parents like they were inferior, as though their love and support for me didn't matter because they didn't have the right pedigree or wealth. It stung, but I swallowed my pride and kept quiet, trying to keep the peace for Daniel's sake. But now, standing there, watching my father stand with quiet dignity in front of the woman who had humiliated him in front of everyone, I realized something. This moment was going to change everything. "I never thought I'd say this," Daniel murmured beside me, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I can't wait to see what your dad does next." I squeezed his hand, unsure of how to respond. But in that moment, I felt a spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this was the turning point. The first time in all these years that someone had stood up to Rosie in a way that would make her think twice. The memory of my first meeting with Rosie came rushing back, fresh as though it had happened yesterday. Daniel had squeezed my hand. Then too, his voice low but filled with optimism. "She'll love you once she gets to know you," he'd promised, hopeful as always. I had tried so hard to win her approval, despite the way she treated me. I took cooking classes to impress her, learned proper etiquette, even changed how I dressed to fit into her world. I wanted so desperately for her to see me as worthy of her son. But one afternoon, I overheard her on the phone. "At least she's trying to better herself," she had said, her voice dripping with disdain, "though you can't completely wash away that middle-class stench." Those words had cut me deeper than I had ever let on. That night, Daniel found me packing my bags. I was sobbing, unable to hold back the tears any longer. "I can't do this anymore," I cried. "I can't keep pretending. She'll never accept me no matter what I do." Daniel had tried to reassure me, holding me close. But I knew the truth. I knew what Rosie thought of me, and I realized deep down that no amount of effort on my part would ever be enough for her. "I'm not good enough for your world, for your mother." The words tumbled from my lips, heavy with the weight of everything I had been feeling. I had tried so hard to fit into that world, to prove that I belonged. But no matter what I did, no matter how many hoops I jumped through, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was always falling short, that I wasn't quite enough for the world that Rosie lived in, or for her. Daniel's eyes softened when he heard me. He took my face gently in his hands, as if he were trying to steady my trembling heart. "You're my world," he said, his voice fierce and certain, cutting through all the doubts I had in my mind. "The rest is just noise." In the months leading up to the wedding, things with Rosie had only gotten worse. It was as if she had taken it as a personal challenge to make me as uncomfortable as possible. Her behavior grew more and more erratic, each decision more passive-aggressive than the last. She forgot to include my parents in the rehearsal dinner invitations. It wasn't an oversight. She knew exactly what she was doing. Then when it was time for my final dress fitting, she scheduled it at the exact same time as my bridal shower. When I chose the shower over the fitting, she acted shocked, as though I had done something unforgivable. "Well," she sniffed, her tone dripping with disdain, "I suppose we'll just have to hope the dress fits." Though with all those sweets at the shower, it was like she was trying to tear me down in any way she could. And for a while, I let her get to me, let her undermine every choice I made. But then she crossed a line. One afternoon, she tried to uninvite my college roommate, Hannah, from the wedding. "She's a dental hygienist, Daniel," Rosie protested, her voice laced with judgment. "What will the Vandermeers think?" It was always about the image with her, about appearances, about maintaining the perfect facade for her perfect world. "I don't care what they think," Daniel shot back, his voice rising, no longer willing to let his mother dictate our lives. "And if you can't support us, you don't have to come either." His words, strong and firm, were like a dam, breaking. They silenced her, and for the first time in months, the wedding preparations began to move forward without her constant interference. That day, a small seed of hope began to grow inside me. Maybe things didn't have to be the way Rosie wanted. Maybe, just maybe, we could still have the day we wanted, despite everything she was trying to ruin. And now, back at the wedding, the moment had finally come for my father to speak. He stood up, his glass raised high in a gesture that demanded attention. His eyes met mine, and something shifted in my chest. The warmth in his gaze made my throat tighten, the lump in my throat growing bigger. I had no idea what he was about to say, but I knew it was going to be important. First, to "My Katie," he began, his voice steady but with an unmistakable emotion in it. "Your mother and I have always taught you that a person's worth isn't measured by their bank account, but by their heart." His words felt like a balm to my soul. It was exactly what I needed to hear, especially in that moment when the world seemed so divided between money and privilege and the real value of love and family. He paused for a moment, as if gathering his thoughts, before he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small envelope. The room fell silent as he unfolded the paper inside. My heart raced, wondering what was happening, what he was about to reveal. "We were going to wait until after the wedding," my dad continued, "but given the current situation, this feels like the perfect moment." My breath caught in my throat. What was happening? I looked at my father in confusion, unsure of where this was going. His hands shook slightly, but his voice remained strong. He pulled out a small key and a folded document from the envelope, and my heart stopped. My mind raced. What could it possibly be? "You see, Rosie," Dad said, his voice cutting through the stillness, "while you were busy planning this lovely party, Susan and I were planning for their future. We've been saving since the day Katie was born. Extra shifts at the garage, Sue working summers, pinching every penny we could, and today we're giving them the deed to their first home." The room erupted in gasps and whispers. It was like someone had pressed pause on reality for a moment. I couldn't process what I was hearing. A house? My parents had never talked about buying a house for me. Sure, they had given me everything they could, love, support, and more memories than I could ever count. But this was beyond anything I had ever imagined. Tears sprang to my eyes as I whispered, "A house? Dad, you didn't—" "We did," Mom's voice cut through, strong and steady. She stood up beside Dad, her presence a pillar of strength. "Every birthday when you asked why we couldn't afford those fancy parties like your friends had, this is why. Every Christmas when we gave you books instead of the latest gadgets, this is why." I felt the weight of all those sacrifices. Things I had never truly understood until now settle in my chest. The years of hard work, the long hours my parents had put in to make sure I had a future, the nights when I'd been disappointed over the simple gifts we had, never knowing the depth of their sacrifices. Dad's voice cracked as he continued, his words catching in his throat. "When you were 5, you drew a picture of your dream house. 3 bedrooms, a big backyard, and a tree perfect for a swing. We kept that drawing all these years." He pulled out a worn, folded piece of paper from his wallet, a fragile relic from my childhood. We found one just like it. My heart swelled with emotion, and for the first time, the tears I had been holding back fell freely down my face. This wasn't just a gift. It was a lifetime of love, a symbol of all the sacrifices my parents had made for me. This was their way of telling me they believed in me, in us. Daniel stepped forward, his arm wrapping around my shoulders, pulling me close. His voice was thick with emotion as he spoke to my dad, his respect for him clear in every word. "Sir, I don't know what to say." My father pressed the key into our hands, the metal cool against my skin. His eyes were filled with love and pride as he looked at us, at the life we were about to build. "Say you'll build a beautiful life. There," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "Say you'll make it a home, just like we always dreamed you would. That's all we've ever wanted," I whispered, my voice trembling with emotion. I glanced at my mom, and in that moment, all the memories of growing up under her steady, loving care flooded back. I thought about all the times I came home from a visit to Rosie's house, my heart broken and my eyes swollen from crying after another one of her cruel remarks. But every time, my mom held me tight, her voice warm and reassuring as she told me, "Someday, Katie, she'll see what we've always known, that you're worth more than all her fancy parties put together." I wanted so badly for that moment to come, but I never imagined it would unfold quite like this. Rosie's face turned an alarming shade of red as she sputtered in disbelief. "A house?" Her voice was rising with panic. "In what neighborhood? Surely not anywhere near." Before she could finish her sentence, my mom cut in, her voice calm and confident. "Actually," she said, a knowing smile on her lips, "it's 3 doors down from the country club. We know the Hendersons, a lovely couple. They sold it to us at a very reasonable price. They said they'd rather have good neighbors than a higher offer. I had to bite my lip to keep from laughing. The Hendersons? Oh, this was too perfect. Rosie had spent years trying to impress them, all while scheming for a board nomination at the country club. Now here they were, part of the reason my parents were able to secure a beautiful home for us. I glanced at my mom, feeling a mix of pride and disbelief. This wasn't just a house. It was everything my parents had worked for, everything they had sacrificed for me. And just when I thought the situation couldn't get any better, a deep voice from the back of the room cut through the tense silence. "Oh, but this gets better," Philip, Daniel's father, called out as he stepped forward. I hadn't even noticed him until now. Lurking in the shadows like some unexpected hero, he and Rosie had divorced years ago, and she had made it clear that she didn't want him anywhere near the wedding. Yet here he was, and in that moment, I knew things were about to take an even more satisfying turn. Rosie's face contorted with shock and fury. "What are you doing here?" she hissed, her voice shrill, watching karma finally catch up. "To you, dear," Philip replied, his voice smooth, but with a sharp edge that sent a shiver down my spine. He wasn't finished yet. "You see, everyone, there's something else you should know. The actual arrangement was that I would cover the wedding expenses, while Jim and Susan focused on Katie and Daniel's future. But Rosie here has been taking credit for my contributions, just like she's been living off my alimony payments for the past 2 decades. The room was silent for a heartbeat before gasps rippled through the crowd. I could barely believe what I was hearing. Philip had been covering the costs all along, while Rosie had been pretending to be the one with all the power. The woman who had tormented me for years had been hiding the truth all this time. Rosie's face turned a deep shade of purple that clashed spectacularly with her designer dress. It was almost comical, how she had been caught in her own web of lies. She was speechless, but not for long. You, she stammered, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Philip, never one to back down, smirked and mocked her. Me, he raised an eyebrow. "Maybe it's time for you to leave, Rosie. Isn't that what you wanted others to do?" For a moment, Rosie stood frozen, unable to process the turn of events. Then, with a swift motion, she grabbed her designer purse, practically ripping it from the table. She stormed toward the exit, her heels clicking furiously against the marble floor. The heavy doors slammed behind her with a satisfying thud that echoed through the room, punctuating the end of her reign of terror. The silence that followed was almost unbearable, but only for a moment. Then, as if on cue, someone began slow clapping. I looked around, confused at first, before I realized what was happening. Another person joined in, then another, and soon the entire room was filled with applause. Cheers and claps rang through the ballroom as people stood in appreciation of the turn of events. Some of them even raised their glasses in Rosie's honor, or rather, in honor of her downfall. I wrapped my arms around my parents, feeling tears spill over my cheeks. "I love you both so much," I said, my voice breaking as all the emotions of the day finally hit me. This wasn't just about a wedding anymore. This was about years of hardship, love, and sacrifice. My mom kissed my cheek, her own eyes glistening. "We love you more, sweetheart. We always will." Daniel, who had been standing by my side, grinned and wrapped an arm around my waist. His warmth felt like a shield from everything that had just happened. "Well," he said with a mischievous glint in his eyes, "I guess this means we won't have to house hunt during our honeymoon after all." I laughed through my tears, the tension of the day slipping away. The rest of the night felt like a dream. We danced, we laughed, and we celebrated. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was fighting for a place in a world I didn't belong to. I realized, finally, that the only people who truly mattered were right there with me. My parents, Daniel, and the people who loved me for who I was. Even the empty seat where Rosie had been sitting seemed to glitter with the sweet satisfaction of karma. Her half-empty champagne glass sat abandoned, and I couldn't help but notice the perfect red lipstick stain on the rim. It felt like a final mark on her last moments of social supremacy, the perfect symbol of her fall from grace. Later, as we cut the wedding cake, Daniel's cousin Miranda leaned in and whispered, "You know, Aunt Rosie's been telling everyone she orchestrated this whole wedding herself, called herself the sole patron at last week's garden club meeting. Guess that story's dead now." I couldn't help but grin. The irony was delicious. "And along with her social calendar," Daniel's Aunt Amy added, a wicked grin spreading across her face. "The ladies' auxiliary board meets tomorrow. Can't wait to hear her explain this one." The dancing continued, and it was in that moment, surrounded by love and laughter, that I realized something. As much as I had once longed for Rosie's approval, her absence didn't feel like a loss. It felt like freedom. As the night wore on, I noticed Daniel in a quiet conversation with his father, Philip. Philip wiped his eyes, his hands shaking as he pulled his son into a fierce hug. "I'm sorry I didn't protect you both from her more," he said, his voice thick with regret. "I thought keeping the peace would be better, but I was wrong. So wrong." Daniel squeezed his father's shoulders, a soft smile on his face. "Dad, you're here now. That's what matters." As we left the reception that night, Daniel's dad pulled me aside for a moment. "You know what the best revenge is, Katie?" he asked, his voice full of quiet wisdom. I shook my head, not quite sure where this conversation was headed. He smiled, his eyes drifting toward Rosie's vacant chair, which seemed to glow with the satisfaction of a karmic victory. "Living well," he said, a knowing look in his eyes. "And thanks to your parents, you two are off to a fantastic start." In that moment, I understood. It wasn't about winning or losing. It was about creating a life that was ours. One built on love, respect, and the unwavering support of the people who truly mattered. And no one, not even Rosie, could take that from us.